How's it going? So today we're going to be looking at some of the recent comments made by Mattson Tomlin in regard to the Aegon's Conquest show that is currently having the pilot written and is being proposed to HBO. So we're going to run through what we know so far, and we're going to look at this recent update and how this whole situation with George R. R. Martin's criticism of House of the Dragon Season 2 and how that's kind of going to impact things, if at all. And, how this statement from Mattson Tomlin kind of impacts or kind of portrays this relationship with Martin that he is already establishing and how we can interpret this going forward. In terms of Aegon's Conquest, background for the whole thing. Aegon's Conquest, also known as The Conquest, was a campaign by Aegon the Conqueror, Aegon Targaryen I, and his sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, and this was around 2 BC, 1 AC. They came to mainland Westeros, and they respectively conquered 6 of the 7 kingdoms, with Dorne being the only not to bend the knee and remain a separate kingdom. They came across, obviously, with their dragons, Aegon having Balerion the Black Dread, with Visenya having Vhagar, the lovely beast that we see in House of the Dragon, and with Rhaenys having Meraxes. And now all 3 of these dragons appear in House of the Dragon, and we have Balerion's skull in King's Landing, we have Meraxes' skull in Dragonstone, and we of course have Vhagar, who is still alive and being as menacing as ever. So this is set about 300 years-ish before the main series. At this time, rulers of the 7 kingdoms were the King in the North, Torrhen Stark, who has this very infamous story with Aegon the Conqueror, which is referenced at the first episode of Season 2 of House of the Dragon. Also have the King of the Mountain and Vale, and this was Rondel Arryn, but he was a child at the time, and so his mother was ruling regent, his mother Shara Arryn. Then we have the King of the Isles and the Rivers. This was Harrenhal, Harren the Black, who is also referenced as being part of the whole Harrenhal backstory storyline whenever Alice was talking about this earlier in Season 2. We have the King of the Rock, who was Lauren the First Lannister. We have the King of the Reach, who was Meryn the Ninth Gardener. We have the Storm King, who was Argilac Durrandon, Argilac the Arrogant. So very well thought of, obviously. And then we have the Princess of Dorne, Meria Martell, who was very elderly and hardcore woman. God bless her. So of these 6 kingdoms, obviously excluding Dorne because they were the only to successfully resist the conquest, some voluntarily submitted, whereas others were made to bend the knee through acts of conquest and violence, and very much so through fire and blood. And it's notable that on their first landing in the whole sphere of Westeros in an attempt to conquer the 7 kingdoms, their main support came from the other previously Valyrian houses, this being the Velaryons, the Celtigars, and the Masseys. These obviously all remained allies in House of the Dragon. And I also think it's notable that 2 of the main swords that were used in this whole conquest sequence would have been Aegon's sword, Blackfire, who obviously ended up in the hands of Aegon II, who we see in House of the Dragon. Obviously, we have Dark Sister, who is wielded by Daemon in the show, but was previously wielded by Queen Visenya. It is also notable that after his conquest, he forged the Iron Throne of the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies, or so the story tells us. So regarding the actual HBO show that is currently having the pilot pitched, the pilot written to be pitched, we have initial reports of this coming from Variety last year. So they reported the project in April 2023, and they stated that it was in early development, which it currently still is. There was even talk about doing a feature film that would set up the series. I previously seen A Dragon Demands talk about this in multiple occasions, having the actual conquest itself be a feature film, and then, the scenes to follow the conquest, especially with the younger kings to follow, being like a follow-up series of 2 or 3 seasons. Confirmation came on the 9th of February this year in 2024 that Mattson Tomlin was revealed to be the screenwriter behind this. So he was going to be writing the pilot, and obviously he's become more well known as of recent for his work on the Robert Pattinson Batman film. We also seen confirmation of this on the 6th of April 2024 when Tomlin posted to his Twitter a lovely picture of him sitting out by a pool, and he had his desk with his laptop, notebook, and with Fire and Blood sitting alongside it, obviously working away on his pilot script for the show to be pitched. So he recently did an interview via Nexus Point News, and I'm just going to read out some of the quotes to you here now so we can consider them for the show going forward, and also looking at this in the context of the blog post that George R. R. Martin just made. I think it's very interesting, but sure, we'll have a wee read anyway. So, Mattson says, "It starts with what George has done. I've now gotten to spend quite a bit of time with him, and there have been a lot of pinch me moments of just kind of going through Fire and Blood, highlighting passages and asking him, what did this mean? What is this? What I think it is? You know, sometimes really grilling him, going, I don't understand what's happening here." So obviously he's talking about he has established, you know, a steady line of communication with George R. R. Martin. Obviously, we know the Conquest is going to be one of the most important prequel, you know, visualizations, if not the most important, especially for the Targaryen line, but even in the history and context of Westeros, this is going to be super, super important to cover and to get right as well. And so the fact that he is establishing this line of communication with George and really valuing George's input, like, we really don't recognize how lucky we are to still have the author and the source material alive and with us. Whereas a lot of other fantasy franchises do not benefit from that, and a lot of other franchises in general that are getting adaptations now don't benefit from that. And so we really need to be making the most use of George that we can, and it sounds like Mattson Tomlin is doing exactly that and asking for clarification where he needs it, which is very, very good to hear. But here he says, and then there's other times I think that it could mean this, but it's really taking that text and treating it like it's a real history. That's one of the things that my approach to this, that Fire and Blood was written like a real history, and these things happened. We know the history of Alexander the Great, we know the history of Napoleon, we know what the battles were, we know that a lot of people died. We know that in some cases what was said or might have been said, but we don't know everything, he continued. Thompson concluded, "For me, it's about making sure that I respect George and I respect the text. And then also, it still has to be a dramatic story. Those characters have to go on a journey. They have to change. They have to go from beginning to middle to end." Figuring out how to do all of that with the cues that that textbook has left for me, and go, okay, I'm going to interpret this very real history and try to make it a really vivid show that hopefully people love and don't hate, doing the best that I can. So, God love this poor man, because it sounds like he's scared to death of this fandom, and you know what, he probably should be, and especially after the outfall of season 2 and the reaction to George's statement. I am also kind of terrified of this fan base and even doing these videos, but sure, here we are. But here it does sound very hopeful that he is treating this text with respect, and that he is obviously valuing the opinion and input of George R. R. Martin, which is all we can really ask of anyone who's interpreting the material. But again, it's really interesting that he keeps going back, being like, yes, this real history and whatever. Like, does he know that this is written by Meister and it's going to be biased and subjective and is also based on unreliable narrators? Like, surely he does. He's gone through it plenty of times. But it's really interesting the fact that he's talking about, you know, this being a real history, and we know things that were said in battles that were had. But obviously, it's about filling in the blanks then in between to make it a compelling story and to develop these characters and give them significant character arcs. And, you know, the importance of characterization in terms of giving them a beginning, middle, and end of their story, which all of this sounds very promising, I'm not going to lie. I liked his work on the Batman, so I'm very interested to see what he does with a medieval fantasy dragon warfare show with dragon lords and dragons and like 7 kingdoms that are all come together at war. But obviously, he's been very heavily informed by George as well, so it does kind of give us that hope that this isn't just going to be a show writer that's being left to their own devices, and then afterwards we're going to be kind of sitting like trying to pick up the pieces of what was meant by the show writer. You know, he is seeking the opinion of George. He is getting the input where he needs it. Anytime that there's a misunderstanding, it seems like he's contacting George for clarification, and that hopefully we will see this in the final product, you know, hopefully if it gets greenlit, which you would like to imagine that the Conquest show will, and based on the fact that he seems to be quite a competent screenwriter, that it hopefully will get greenlit on his scripts. But again, there is also this consideration that there could be possible issues with this now because of the relationship between George and HBO after the release of this whole Butterflies blog post. But again, HBO can't really afford to lose this relationship with George or to lose the rights to produce shows of A Song of Ice and Fire, because again, it is their major flagship, and so they're not really in a position where they can afford to be doing that or forfeiting these rights. So hopefully George has them in enough of a chokehold that he can now have this screenwriter who is very much committed to a competent and faithful adaptation of his work and valuing his input and recognizing that he has to do right by George's legacy, which seems to be what he's outlining here. And so I'm feeling quite hopeful about the Conquest show. What about you? Any thoughts you have about this, about Mattson Tomlin, about the whole Conquest show in general, the direction that they could go with it? What do you think about this whole idea of a potential feature film followed by a couple of seasons? There's a lot of possibilities coming up, and it's looking hopeful so far. And how do you think that this recent blog post by George R. R. Martin is going to affect potentially the Conquest show, potentially future shows, or do you think that it's going to benefit them because now his contributions are going to be recognised more? So let me know what you think, and I will be down in the comments having a chat with you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.